Increasingly, our HPAC members have been exerting a wide range of leadership in making distinct and important contributions to our mission. For example, in recent weeks, we've had two of our members, Bruce Parker and Robert Chris. They've both presented the fruits of their work on creating very useful emulators for projecting future temperature levels based on a wide range of scenario conditions. And Ron Bayman and Mike McCracken have been working hard to refine our latest analysis of the relative pros and cons of a wide range of cooling interventions through our urgency working group. And Ron has been leading an effort to develop an HPAC open letter in support of applied science testing and piloting of near-term climate cooling approaches. Robert Tulip has been currently writing a book on the development of an albedo protocol to govern future global efforts to stabilize and restore a safe climate in the face of temperature acceleration. Herb Simmons has been moderating a dynamic series of important videos on many subjects for the Climate Emergency Forum. Meanwhile, I've been focusing on convening global online conferences on the temperature acceleration emergency and the development of national affiliate organizations to build political momentum among climate vulnerable countries to champion a new climate plan and develop a first movers coalition. A number of our members are actively developing specific climate cooling interventions, such as Sev Clark on nanobubbles, but I could mention many other examples. Meanwhile, Greg Slater has been developing and refining a concrete approach to the first large-scale pilot tests of stratospheric aerosol injection. And that is the topic of our discussion for today. Greg will be giving us an update on his efforts in this important domain and stimulating our thinking and engagement in this effort. So, Greg, let me turn the gavel over to you to give us the very latest on your work in this area. Take it away, Greg.
Thank you for the opportunity. The title is Moving Forward with SAI Testing, and I just begin with my assumption. And some of the, I don't have to do a lot of background for you guys, obviously. So my assumption is it's already too hot, and there are already too many secondary effects in order that we should be satisfied with the inevitable disastrous consequences of accepting even the current level of warming at 1.5 C, when we have the capacity to cool the Earth by several different methods. In other words, there is no substitute for global cooling. And you'll notice that I inverted the usual catechism, which is there is no substitute for emissions reduction, because I think this is the crucial line that has to be internalized. So my position is that it is immoral and illogical not to cool the Earth. The question is how fast and by which method? My response to that is we should cool the Earth as fast as possible using all methods available as rapidly as they can be scaled up. So the focus of my efforts, and because I still am of the opinion that SAI has the greatest capacity to cool the planet as rapidly as possible, is the method that I have focused on. And therefore, I am advocating that the first initial tests of SAI be done immediately. That doesn't mean that I'm against all the other methods. I'm in favor of them all. I think we need all the tools working and scaling as fast as possible, so we have a variety of techniques and we can see which ones accelerate the fastest, but we have to get started on all fronts. And my focus has been on SAI. Okay, so about 5 years ago, I concluded that a good choice for a first test of SAI would be in the stratosphere above the Antarctic continent. I should say that although Dennis referred to as an advocacy for the first large-scale test of SAI, this test, as I originally conceived, was meant to be about 40 kilotons, and that's still I regard extremely small scale. So we're talking about a small scale by any reasonable standard. I just want to make that clear. So why an Antarctic test? My choice of for the stratosphere above Antarctic for the test was driven by the following considerations. The lower boundary of the stratosphere at the poles is only about 10 kilometers in altitude, making it easily accessible by transport aircraft. Antarctica, unlike the Arctic, is isolated and almost entirely free of human population and of societies and nations. And because this is a test and not a cooling, not an immediate effort to cool the Earth or part of it, that the Antarctic seems suitable. And also near the poleward drift of the stratosphere will not carry the injected aerosol load very far into lower latitudes. And so the test will be somewhat contained from the rest of the world. So I have made previous presentations of my Antarctic test proposal, and the detailed description can be found at this link, which is one of the links that Dennis kindly included in his announcement, and I can send them to you as well. I'd be very appreciative if anybody takes a look at them and comments. Excuse me, I've got a little bit of a hoarse throat. So I also have slides describing the details of the test, and we can discuss those details after my presentation if there's interest. But I must say that I have changed my position on testing recently, and as I will now explain. So the change of focus. Within the past year or so, I finally reached the conclusion that the most urgent goal is to do a test of any sufficient magnitude. Somewhat arbitrarily, I identified a 1-ton release of aerosol in the stratosphere as the minimum useful test that urgently needs to be done. Let me try to explain why. I have come, unfortunately, to mistrust the motivations and good faith of those who would endlessly delay even the smallest test of SAI in the stratosphere without any indication of a means of getting by that. And let me explain. The current situation is that for over 50 years, a completely successful de facto ban on even the smallest SAI tests has been in place, as evidenced by the fact that none has occurred. The ban is maintained through what I would call a regulatory trap. I demand that a regulatory framework exists before any testing is done, but the regulatory framework is never forthcoming. Also, a false equivalency, conflating small tests with an endless open-ended deployment at scale of enormous magnitude. And an enforcement through fear, not law. These are my perceptions of what's going on, and these we can be argued about. I should say that in my conception or vision of SAI, even if it's deployed, the trajectory from the initial first tests at small scale through a test which is now affecting the atmosphere and cooling the temperature, global temperature potentially, there is a continuum of tests. SAI is never out of beta in the way I look at it. It's always in test. This is the way I look at it. So I want to consider what I call the enforcement mechanism. If there is no actual legal structure preventing a subscale test, why has one not occurred long ago? And I perceive it to be because of something like this. The ban is enforced not through law, but through fear, through professional ostracism, through funding withdrawal, through the implicit threat that anyone who dares even a small test will be made an example of. This is almost like a thought crime. The target is not just the researcher who does a test, but anyone who might even consider acting. The message is clear. Cross the line and your career is over. Your colleagues will disavow you. Your institution will distance itself. Your funding will vanish. The result is a prohibition more effective than any law could be. Laws can be challenged, tested, overturned. But social enforcement operates in the shadows. There is no court of appeal. There is no formal rule to cite or dispute. There is only the understanding, absorbed through 1,000 signals, that this is forbidden. And for 50 years, this has been enough. Not a single test. Not because it was illegal, because it was unthinkable. At least this is my analysis. And again, this is something to discuss. So I want to put a 1 to 10 ton SAI test in perspective. And that's the kind of test that I'm now advocating. So we all know these numbers. Everybody knows these numbers. But I think a graphic is useful to bring the point home of the magnitude of the test I'm talking about, which is effectively banned still. So this red patch along the bottom is a representation by means of the area of a circle of the amount of CO2 that is emitted into the atmosphere every year currently by humanity. And because it's so large at this scale, you can see that the curvature is very small. So this is an enormous, enormous circle that goes far below the screen. And I can only fit on this little sliver. But I wanted to show the enormity of the magnitude of the 40 gigatons. And that's entirely unregulated. Now, on the left up here in the much smaller circle is this disk that represents the 50 megatons per year of SO2 that is input into the troposphere, the troposphere, not the stratosphere, by human activities every year. It peaked at around 100 megatons per year, and it's been coming down, but it's still at 50 megatons per year. That's not banned. Now, next to it is a blue disk, which represents roughly the 20 megatons that is estimated to have been input into the stratosphere as part of a natural experiment by the volcano Pinatubo erupting in 1991. So that's a natural experiment, so we can't ban that one. We don't have control over it. So finally, on the right is the proposed initial fast test, which would be from 1 to 10 tons. But at 10 tons, you can't see it on this. It's too small. And I even put a 100 power magnifying glass over it to hopefully magnify it to the point where you could see it, but it's still too tiny. It's such a tiny fraction of a single pixel, you can't even make it out. So this infinitesimally small test has been banned for the past 50 years, effectively. That's the way I look at it. So that's the context that I want to be thought about. So to me, this convincingly demonstrates the abject absurdity and grotesqueness of a total ban on testing SAI at this scale. So as someone should have said, the first ton is always the hardest. So the opponents demand zero tests of any magnitude because zero testing, a total ban, is the only position that doesn't require justification. Any permitted test invites a question. Okay, you're letting us do 10 tons, so why not 100? Why not 1,000? Now they have to, once they concede an actual level, then they have to defend why that boundary is there. And they can't, because there is no scientifically defensible boundary that forbids small scale testing, and that goes right up to tens of kilotons before you see any effect on humanity or on the Earth's environment. And this, keep in mind these other things that are going up there of orders and orders and orders of magnitude greater. So I look at it as a successful 1 to 10 ton test breaks the taboo forever. There is a taboo that needs to be broken. That's the way I see it. It transforms SAI from forbidden to already done. It's now a thing. And that is the motivation for the small scale end of the testing, as far as I'm concerned. So as I said, my effort had been to develop this proposal of an Antarctic test at the level of around 40 kilotons of SO2 injected into the atmosphere above the or the stratosphere above the Antarctic. And because of my interpretation of where things stand, I shifted to the smallest usable test that can be done with the admittedly main goal of breaking the ban, defying the ban, which is not a real ban, but it's worked. So I want to defy the ban. Of course, it's a scientific test. It's designed to be a scientific test, not flippant, but it's designed to break the ban. And so I put the initial test at the 1 to 10 ton level, and I've given then you have a series of tiers, what I call, leading up to a 40 kiloton test, which is essentially the Antarctic test, FAST, what I call it, first Antarctic stratospheric test, which was the original one I was pushing. And I'm still developing that in detail. And I still plan to submit that to possible funders. So the first ones are essentially looking at, from a scientific perspective, looking at the local plume that is created from the ejection of these smaller amounts. And so they are local tests, even though they're in the stratosphere, because they will be diluted by orders of magnitude by the time they spread around the globe, and therefore your field of study is locally. The Antarctic test would, I believe, be enough aerosol that it would be detectable at some level around the globe at those latitudes, not the full globe, but a full longitude. So the important thing is that at the tier 0 level, I believe it is possible you could do the test I'm talking about for around $1 million, maybe even less at 1 ton. Now 10 tons, it's going to be more, but at the low end of this initial test, it is doable by an individual, a non-billionaire. Now the tier 1 could be fundable by a millionaire, and the tiers 2 to 4 fundable by billionaires, but logistically, they may require collaboration with a nation state. So I focus on the tier 0 test because, well, first, it's the obvious starting point for any development phase of SAI from a scientific and technical perspective. And it is within reach, financially and logistically, of individual parties, thus decoupling it from nation-state control. And to me, that's crucial. Okay, so a little more description of this initial tier test. I call it a pop and dump operation. And what it would amount to is in 1 to 10 tons, and I'm starting with 1 ton in particular, dumping at 15 kilometers and achievable with commercial aircraft. And so I've listed 4 commercial aircraft that can do the job. They can reach 15 kilometers or better with a payload of 2,000 of a ton of aerosol. And the reason for 15 kilometers, even though that above the foal it's 10 kilometers, but I want to be able to, you want the freedom to choose many areas to carry out the test. And these first 2, the Gulfstream and the Bombardier, can be chartered worldwide. In other words, you can rent a plane, you can find an airfield, you can hire a pilot, load the aerosol, and you can do the test. Now, the lower part of the slide shows some potential dump zones and associated airfields that are reachable by these jets for a round trip, which includes flying to the dump zone and then climbing to the, say, in the order of 15 kilometers, dumping the stuff and coming down and flying back. So they're all accessible. The key insight is that a 1 ton test at 15 kilometers can be done from existing architecture over international waters with commercially available aircraft. No new technology required, and it can be done independent of state support. So now this is just a map showing a set of candidate regions that are in international waters away from entanglement with any national boundaries or economic zones or everything, and positioned to be also out of aircraft fly routes, so they won't be interfering with air traffic as much as possible. But I wanted to show a variety of potential dump zones at different longitudes and latitude. Now, again, of course, as you go to lower latitude, the bottom of the stratosphere climb gets higher and higher. So the lower latitude ones may be a stretch, but some of the planes could do it. And this is on some kind of projection, Mercator, or whatever. So you see the brown band along the top. That is actually on a globe is a circular hole at above the pole, and so there is supposedly international waters above the pole, and that is accessible from many airfields. And you see all the arrows are the trajectories, rough trajectories of the planes as they start from an airfield in some country or another and reach the dumping point. And so you have the possibility of Western aligned countries, of Russia and China, of non-aligned countries executing the test from their own airfields into international waters. And then these are example trajectories which are reachable from the planes I identified. So then this is just another view, which is on globes. So it shows more. It's not so distorted, at least in the center region, as the projection map I showed before. And this is by no means an exhaustive set of airfields and dump sites. This is just showing the kind of distribution you have available.
Greg, can I ask a question? They don't seem to be going to the Antarctic, the lines you have. I'm not clear.
Oh, well, right, and I didn't make that clear, and I'm sorry. As I said, I shifted from the proposal for an Antarctic test to a minimal test. The Antarctic test is a large scale test, and it is designed to be in the Arctic. And the reasons for that are the ones I gave. This test is an infinitesimal test, and I want it to be accessible all over the world. It can be done in a variety of places. So I don't have one for the Antarctic because that's not the point of this test. The point of this test is a small test that can be done by lots of different countries, in different areas. So that's the point there. I didn't make that clear. I'm sorry. So this is meant to be a scientific test. So what about sensors? So my conception when I was first thinking about the Antarctic test was this idea that you would want to instrument the stratosphere. Essentially, so that and I can see that would be the direction people would go if they started to do a real SAI system that was having effect, because you want to be monitoring it constantly. So now in this small scale test, so you'd have a sensor swarm, and these would be balloon-borne sensors. In the case of the Antarctic test, these would circulate with the aerosol over the course of the test, which in that case was designed to be a 6-month to year-long test as the aerosol rained out. But these minimal tests are a single flight dumping a ton or so, or a couple, into the stratosphere, creating a plume that then you would observe, and you would do local scientific investigation of that, how the plume dispersed, how it interacted with the constituents of the atmosphere, how it, things like clumping and things like that would be investigated. So for that, this is the idea would be to have a local sensor swarm. So in this case, hundreds of sensor packages would be released from the same plane that is releasing the aerosol, each with a self-inflating balloon. And the balloons would descend slowly over hours, taking data continuously. That's the idea of the sensor and the data taking for these initial tests. So here is a table which just gives a summary for the different tests, a little more information on the kind of sensors that would be in these small, lightweight packages. And for the different tiers, which required higher and higher cost, as you start with test 0, it's a pretty primitive sensor package, which basically gives you positional and orientation information, temperature, pressure, and then ideally there would be at least one simple instrument or sensor which would give you at least some measurement of the presence of the plume or the plume in some way. Like you can have a backscatter test sensor to just get a light level, and you could see the diminution of the light. But this one, at the tier 0 level, you're going to have a primitive set. But even with a primitive set, you can be wringing out and developing all the technology that would be used. And again, the conception is that that every test is part of a continuum of technology and magnitude that doesn't end at any specific place, and it's always being tested. It's always in test phase. So this is the initial technological aspect of a minimum test. Oops, wrong way. So what does a tier 0 test accomplish? So for me, and I know this is probably controversial, it fundamentally defies an imaginary band, completely with hopefully completely changing the game. And that's to me crucial. It also tests the reaction of the world community to a test. So it is a test also of the reaction of the world community to a test. It's a second order test, but that's also important to see because there's predictions all over the map. Just like there are scientific predictions of the behavior of the aerosol, there's predictions of the behavior of the world community, which practically go up to global thermonuclear war or whatever, which is horseshit as far as I'm concerned. But, so this would be a test of the behavior of the world community, which needs to be done. It also puts pressure on the timid to act because I think in the relevant scientific communities, I'm sure that, I assume there are people who would be in favor of tests, but basically afraid to say so. I mean, if you look there was a recent poll, which I think you probably all know about, of, I know several hundred climate scientists, which suggested that well over half of them believed that SAI was inevitable. Now, whether they thought that was a good idea, that they differed on that. But well over half, I can't remember the exact number. So there are people out there undoubtedly who would favor testing, but basically are afraid to, for valid reasons, for personal reasons, to say so. So this puts pressure on the timid to act, because otherwise they're out of the picture. And also it can and should be done as a fully legitimate scientific test. It's not just a stunt, and from which much can be learned. And it also has a full transparency policy, as I envision it. So the test is announced ahead of time. It's not secret. Comments prior to the test are solicited and analyzed and considered. And And even there may be, I mean, I don't see why there couldn't be passive participation, advisory participation of scientists and policymakers all over the world, but they don't have any veto power. But they can advise and they can submit. And then the data is released to the world immediately. The data is totally open. Papers will be published, and the data is made available to the world for every test that happens. It's made available immediately for them to analyze themselves. So that's the nature of the transparency policy. And what about after the first test? So this is not about doing a stunt and then let's wait another 50 years. No, this is the start of a continuous set of tests at a pace, at the fastest pace you can do, consistent with analyzing each test as you go. In other words, you look at what happened, you look at any problems that came up, either technical or whatever, you modify. With each test, you're in a virtuous cycle where you solve problems, you redesign, you improve, you add sensors, etc., and you're increasing the technical level and the scientific level as you go, and the observational level, and you're keeping track of any serious problems that develop and dealing with those before you go on. But within those constraints, you go on to the next test as soon as you can. In fact, so let's leave it at that. And you're also dealing with the reactions of the world community. If the reactions are severe, then you obviously have to react to those. You have to take those into account. But you don't know what those are going to be until you begin the simplest, tiniest test. That little invisible speck has to be done. And that's where you start. And that's the trajectory of testing that I am advocating. So that's pretty much the short presentation. There's links here to some other presentations, which I'd be grateful if anybody would be willing to look at them and comment and criticize or whatever. And Dennis included those in his announcement, so you can find them there, and I can send them to you if you want to. So with that, thanks for the time, and I'm interested in hearing from the thoughts of the people who are attending. So thank you.
Fantastic. Greg, brilliant presentation. Very, very effective. And I think this could stimulate our discussions and perhaps action in a number of directions. So let's see if we can see who is interested to have our first questions to Greg. I see Jonathan, then Sev, and then Glenn have their hands up. So Jonathan, go ahead.
Thanks. Great presentation. Were your slides numbered like with page numbers?
I'm sorry, I meant to do that and I didn't. I apologize.
Yeah, no problem. I can describe which slide the question's about. So
okay.
The one where you had the big circles representing emitted sulfur, and then the littler one from a volcano. Right. Do you think it would be good to have a slide following that showed the penetration into the stratosphere from those two emission types? In other words, the stuff that gets burned at the surface by industry probably rarely makes it to the stratosphere, whereas the amount that you were referring to in the volcano, I think, was the amount that made it to the stratosphere. Yeah. So the kind of a little bit of an apples and oranges thing. It's good to show that we emit a lot, and then maybe a second slide would relate it to the stratosphere.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Thanks. Do you want me to show that slide again, or is it? I think it's enough that you described it. If you want to, I can put it up there.
Oh no,
you want me to?
It's okay.
Okay.
And then
I think everybody remembers it, and yeah, that's a good point. Now, I will say though that as far as damage to humans, the low altitude stuff does real damage because it is concentrated, highly concentrated in highly dense populations at low altitude. Whereas the tests in the stratosphere, or even the eventual the eventual large scale, are diluted by the surface area of the Earth. So they are, although they do affect everybody, their concentration is vastly lower than what is those 50 megatons are highly concentrated as beyond just the magnitude of the emissions. So I would that's just one response to that. But nonetheless, I think it's important to acknowledge that stuff is where that stuff's going, and it's not going to the stratosphere. I mean, I think maybe some of it gets up there in some cases, but not much. I agree.
Right. And the larger point I wanted to discuss was I think that you hit the nail on the head that even though you talk a lot about technical issues in your presentation, the entire presentation could almost be about the taboo aspect of it. So until we can cross over on this taboo issue, the technicalities of doing the tests are somewhat irrelevant. So have you done anything on the taboo issue? In my research while you were talking, I found that the first step to overcoming taboos of all types is creating a safe and non-judgmental space in order to do the testing. And that can be done back when we had a Pioneer America. There was these wide open spaces where people could go and do stuff, and nobody really tried to regulate them because it was such a big space. The planet has gotten very small, in our mental consideration of it. We think that every square inch is somehow needs to be protected. Have you thought anything about how to break that taboo?
Well, I mean, I have to admit that my approach is somewhat defiant. And that's because I think that there's disingenuousness on the parts of on the tactics that are used to delay any testing. Again, I mean, in terms of the wide open spaces, I mean, it's both wide open spaces and the magnitude of your disturbance. And the initial tests in any case, which are also effectively banned, are so infinitesimal that now that I don't, I regard it as I regard the imposition of control over those tests as, well, I would say immoral. However, I think your point, which I hadn't thought of, is a good one, and but I haven't thought about it. So it's a very useful point that you make. But again, my approach has been one of kind of outrage and defiance. Now, I know that's not the kind of approach that HPAC wants to take, but I think it's this absolute ban that I'm trying to it's a barrier that I'm trying to get through, and I think it may be a game changer. But if you have ideas on how that breaking that ban, which in a way is sort of a hostile act, I don't know, but doing that in a more peaceful way. I mean, when I say hostile act, this is not actual violence, but it's just I see it as a necessity to moving forward, to creating momentum. So anyway, that's sort of my response, but I agree, but it's a good point you raise, and I'll think about that, and I'm happy to get.
Thank you. I've got a very specific idea, which we'll discuss later, but I'd like to go on to the ones who have their hands up first.
Yeah.
And then Robert Tulip. Sev?
Yeah. You said that you could start doing a test around greater than 52 south. If you go to 60 degrees south and beyond, the Antarctic Treaty is likely to be a hurdle you'll need to address. And there are one or two other Antarctic treaties or agreements which may also be problematic.
Okay. Well, that's a good point, and I was aware of the Antarctic Treaty, but I didn't know the actual boundary of it. But that's certainly something that one has to consider in approaching this. So thanks.
I've put it in the chart in the chat.
Great, thank you. I appreciate it.
Very good. Robert?
Thanks so much, Greg. It was a really superb presentation, and there's a whole series of really important actions. I think your first point that the only real climate action is cooling action that removes heat from the Earth's system. Your point that I've made myself before, that decarbonisation is not a substitute for cooling, is a really essential part of the story that needs to be got across. And so it leads to this suggestion of, what is the motivation for the soft ban that we see? And to my approach is to say, well, who benefits from that soft ban? And it's clear that the idea that the only climate action is so-called mitigation, which actually doesn't mitigate climate action, but the expansion of the renewable energy industry, the idea that that is the only climate action has a significant commercial benefit from the prevention of SAI, which the UK Royal Society said that that SAI is 1,000 times better value for money than decarbonisation as a climate strategy. 1,000 times to one. That's insane. How can you ban something that's 1,000 times better in delivering your purported objectives? Now, what it illustrates is that the moral story is central, as you pointed out. Now, SAI has great potential to limit extreme weather, biodiversity loss, sea level rise, systemic disruptions. They are all major looming causes of human and ecological suffering. And so there's this sense that the people who are banning it just don't care. They don't care about all of that suffering. It's immoral. It's evil. It's something that should be called out as a mass delusion that needs to be challenged on the basis of a moral story. Now, as Jonathan was pointing out, there's been great examples of vastly worse tests. Look at the Trinity test, where in Los Alamos, where Oppenheimer said, there's a slight risk that this could totally destroy the Earth, and yet that went ahead because of the moral story of the need to defeat Japan and Germany in the Second World War, which overrode those worries about risks. Whereas here we're talking about something that's essentially zero risk. Well, maybe not zero, but it's not up there with the atomic bomb. And so there's this problem, or part of the opposition is that SAI enables the continuation of technocratic capitalism. And that's a whole debate that really needs a lot of conversation, because the way I see it is that we don't really have any choice at the moment about who's going to dominate the Earth for the next 20 years. Technocratic capitalism is leading, but if we want to have a gradual shift towards the sort of global thinking that is needed for sustainable civilization, then we need to start by applying globally relevant cooling technologies, which is where you're looking at the foot in the door, the first step towards that. And so my focus has been on how to identify and build the constituencies of support that are needed, and this is why I see the capitalist industries who face the greatest commercial damage from warming as the key people who are able to generate that support. And you were talking about the shaming, that the level of fury, and I think one of the great examples is Russ George, and we had Russ as a guest speaker here at HPAC, and there was a complete refusal to engage with the science of what he was doing, and instead this pylon of furious political hostility that cast him as a rogue and these sorts of things. So there's a need to build that political constituency of support in order to enable the testing to proceed. So I loved your theme about orders of magnitude, and because like there are famous pictures of comparing the sun to a big red giant star,
Yeah.
and how human beings are just incapable of understanding. Like we operate at the mesoscale, and can't comprehend those differences. So anyway, excellent presentation, and I just wanted to share those comments and
Thank you.
response, Greg.
Excellent. Glenn is next, and then
Well, can I just check if Greg has any response on any of those points?
Greg?
Yeah. So, I mean, there was a lot there. I agree that it is important to try to build constituent is try to win people over, win hearts and minds. I came to the place that I was so, outraged at what I regard as the disingenuousness of, I'd have to say much of the just the hardcore opposition to SAI, even these tiny tests, that I wanted to change the game by defying the test and without permission, without because all the efforts to to be nice, play nice, are just rebuffed, and no matter how small the test, it's never small enough, no matter what precautions. And again, I mean, I don't reject the concept of a regulatory framework, but it's never forthcoming. Has there been one well-defined, a set of rules? This is the conditions under which where is that? After 50 years, that it suggests to me that they're not serious people. And so, I mean, I have to admit, Robert, that I found this aspect of I'm not dealing with people who are honest in many cases. This is what I feel. And so whether this is the right attitude or not, I feel somewhat compelled to defy that ban once at this tiny scale and see the reaction. And I actually, there's no guarantee. No one knows what happens when you do that, but it's my hope that you can no longer play that game anymore. They can't. Now they have to negotiate, and that's sort of been the thrust of mine. But certainly trying to, I think you described many of the ways that which you want to get your point across, very similar to what I want to do. But I was developing this Antarctic test for a long time, or trying to develop it, which was a bigger test, and it was really meant to be a very serious proposal for a scientific test. And then I concluded basically that the game was rigged. And so that's why I returned to these tiny tests, which nonetheless can be valuable scientifically, but were ones that could be done much more easily to essentially defy the ban. That's the way I was thinking.
Well, Slice and Scopex tried to do that.
Well, but of course Scopex didn't do it. They did it. The mistake they made was do it over, do it over somebody's territory. That's why I would only do it in the international waters. And also, they were, I guess they didn't want to fight about it. They didn't want to do it without a specific permission. And I want to go ahead and do it over international waters at this, again, we're talking about, something that is so small. And again, it's even if you go up to tens of kilotons, and Doug McMartin admitted this. Yeah, I mean that it's very unlikely. It's marginal that you could even see the effect there, and much less that you would have these dangerous effects or anything like that. So,
And then there's make sunsets at kilograms.
say again.
Make sunsets.
Make sunsets.
Well, there is. I mean, one could. When Make Sunsets got started, I thought that was, well, first of all, of course, they never pretended to be a scientific exercise. They were doing it as an entrepreneurial thing, which is fine with me. I've given money to them. I thought it was, too small to break the ban. But I mean, if in one way you could look at it as they broke the ban at that scale. In other words, they've been doing it for 3 years and they haven't been arrested. Nobody's come for them. There's been no consequences to their tests. So good on them. Now we're ready for the next test. Now that's my level. It's just, 1,000 times bigger or whatever. So, and this is the idea that if you see what, if the response is not there, good. We keep building. And it's not like we're doing it recklessly, but you do it very carefully. But if the response doesn't come, then you keep at it. And then if the response comes, then you deal with that. And so, if you want, you can regard the Make Sunset guys as tier -3 or something. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, they're still doing it. And, they're not putting a dent in global warming, but they're the only ones doing a damn thing right now. And as I say, I've given them money, even though it's more moral support than anything.
Okay, well, we do have a number of other who want to get in.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, please, in your interjections, gentlemen, try to be as short as possible so you can give time for others to.
I'll try to also.
Yeah. So Glenn is next, then Ron, then Mike, then John.
Hi,
Glenn?
my name's Glenn, and yeah, so we're looking at SAI experimentation, and so we're looking at working somewhat close to the polar region, let's say 52 north latitude, or north of there, or 52 south latitude, and there's 25 nations that cover this region. So one question is, what is out of the 25 closest to the poles? Which nation is most supportive? Because we don't care about the 24 that are not supportive. We're just, I mean, we're willing to break contact with them and not fight them. Just identify and break contact and focus on the one. But here's the question: who's the one?
Up at the North Pole, I mean,
or no, the 25 nations closest to the North Pole or the South Pole.
Or the South Pole? Well, okay.
Well, we have a list of the nations. We know who they are, but out of the 25 nations that are the closest to the North Pole or closest to the South Pole, we've got the list. Which ones of those are the most supportive?
Well, I mean, to be honest, I haven't been researching that, because what I want to do is what I'm proposing or developing is the idea of doing these tiny tests, which are local. I mean, the stuff gets diffused orders of magnitude by the time it gets near any nation or above any nation. It's still in the freaking stratosphere. I'm not even sure what the legalities of the stratosphere. Does a nation own a little cone going out to the Andromeda galaxy above it? But
no,
anyway.
I think it's just a matter you do it until you get stopped.
Yeah, well, that's kind of but I'm doing the smallest scale possible, but nonetheless a defiance. And I'm trying to stay the hell away from every nation, as far away as I can. And so I'm certainly staying away from the. Well, I did put this Arctic international water supposedly up there right at the pole, which I haven't really confirmed. But I wouldn't want to do it there. Unless the Russians would be the ones supporting it, and then.
But let's say if you're in the Martian Islands and you go to do a test, who stops you?
Well, this is the question, and this is, I mean, this would test whether anything has any teeth in trying to stop it.
Our strategy is to just go wherever we can and push forward, and then if we get stopped somewhere, go elsewhere, and push forward, and also focus on the engineering side. With a DC-8, it costs $10 million. The engineers may need that for 1 to 3 years to install the pipes and the tanks and the instrumentation, and then the instrumentation needs to be developed, and there's lots of experiments that have to be done just getting everything working. So the engineers may need 1 to 3 years. And then after that, you could move 30 tons or so of material. And there's different types of materials, different ways of spraying. There's different types of nozzles. I mean, there's all sorts of things that need to be worked on, a lot that goes way beyond what you're talking about. But so we're looking for somebody, just one airfield that's supportive.
Wow.
Well, I mean, I just briefly, the vision I have is that this is individually sponsored, or this is not state sponsored. I mean, if a state wants to sponsor it and let use their airfields, and that's fine. But state sponsorship at this point is really hard. And so, you know, I want to do the minimal test, but I agree with your approach of, you know, going as far as you can, as long as you are looking at what the problems, real problems, not artificial barriers, but real problems that come up in the course of your development. And I agree that engineering, there's a lot of engineering challenges, but my approach would be learn as you go at these small scale. You go up there with a variety of dispersal mechanisms at the same time, and you disperse with all of them, and you learn by doing. So rather than an endless wait period while you perfect a system, you start doing it, because, you know, look at projects. They blew things up. You know, the space program, they were blowing up rockets. Musk is still blowing up rockets because he's pushing the state of the art. And so that's what I want to do. I don't want to have to perfect the system as it seems to be the demand now. And that's a prescription, as far as I'm concerned, for an endless delay. So you take on a risk of failure, not a risk of damage to humanity, but you might fail, but you're going to start doing something. That's almost paramount to me. And so minimize the lead up engineering and maximize the engineering learning on the job is sort of where I look.
Very good, Greg. Ron, you're next.
Yes, thank you very much, Greg. I really loved your talk, and I love your passion to, as you know, to do something, and Glenn too. I mean, I think, this is what we need. We need to get going on this one way or the other. And I agree, we can't wait for perfection in governance or any other thing, but we do want to do as much as we can to build support, to build so that this act of defiance won't lead to a backlash, for example, but will lead to a sort of galvanization, a more support and more tests and a continuation of this. So that's where some of you probably know where I'm going with this. I put a link to our open letter in the chat, and I welcome any of you who support testing and piloting to sign that open letter. We're gonna sending it out now for signatures. The HPAC has supported. Almost all of the members of the steering committee, steering circle have supported, and Greg and Alan, and so we have 10 signatures, and we're ready to go. Just one little point. And on that point, actually, the issue, if you publicize this in advance, per Glenn's point, you may get a lot of flack about where the hell you're going to take off your flight. All these things will become controversial. So it really requires some kind of thinking about how to do this, without just getting blocked right away with having all these countries say, no, you're not taking off for my airspace or something like that. I mean, I'm just envisioning, these worst case scenarios. Now I had one other technical point, but Mike is coming after me. I was waiting for Mike to get, but I'm sure I'm all, I believe that Mike may ask you this question about the length of time it takes for the aerosols to form from the aerosol precursors. Precursors may suggest a need for a longer time period for the measuring, just on a technical point. But I'll leave that to Mike if he's so inclined. But I think it's something we, as you know, Greg, we have kind of been talking about in the
I know.
in the urgent response group. So
Yeah.
thank you very much. It's a great presentation.
Thank you.
Great. Let's move on to Mike. Mike?
Okay, so I have a couple of things I want to say. One is I thought the scope test was actually just releasing water in the troposphere and stuff, and wasn't even a real test. And John Moore's comment was the problem with that had to do with transparency with the tribes where it was going to be done and stuff. So I'm not sure about the taboo. Another thing about the taboo is the scientific community for quite some time, decades maybe or something, pushed by even people like, Alan Robach especially, who sometimes doesn't favor it, has been trying to put together plans and preparations to take advantage of making measurements after the next volcanic eruption. And there were certainly a whole lot of efforts made, I think, to make measurements after the Hunga Tunga or whatever the big eruption was. It went so high, it sort of went beyond a lot of scientific capability. So I'm not sure at all that the taboo on tests is really a scientific position. I think it's much more a position simply against having to do geoengineering of any kind as opposed to mitigation. And so I'm not sure just doing an experiment is the way to get around that kind of objection. So those are a few context points. But I guess in terms of your proposal, I don't have a sense at all about how this sensing of anything is going to work at all. I think the notion of putting out balloons from the same plane isn't going to really help much. Have you even looked at what the background amount of stuff is? I mean, what NOAA is up there measuring is trying to get the stratospheric background, and whatever you're going to be putting in would be in addition to the stratospheric background. And so you really have to get a sense of how much it takes to be detectable. My sense of scientists are saying what we want to learn from is a volcanic injection. When we want a good size injection to try and learn from. And then just one other comment, which is there's a whole bunch of things that get injected into the stratosphere all the time. And so what is it one's going to learn from this that one can't learn by instrumentation of some kind of existing putting things in? I mean, there's rocket plumes, there's air plume exhaust, there's all kinds of things that go in. I mean, there was just an announcement of how the U.S. is, proposing one of these really fast aircraft or whatever it is. And so what it did was had to develop also was a plane that would go behind it to try and measure what was going on or something like that and try and see on the exhaust. So I think that's going on. I think the issue is how to convince people that we really need SAI or intervention. And that's what I think I and others have been trying to do, and it's a hard go. I agree with that. It's just amazing that there's this thing of, oh, well, we'll just be, if you look at the last Climate Interactive presentation, we're just going to head up to 3 degrees C. I mean, are they kidding that that's going to be where we go? I mean, it's the question Herb asks, if not now, when? When is there going to be a realization to do something? And that's what I think, HPAC has been trying to get at and stuff. So, I guess I'm not quite sure what the experiment would do. I should look at your more details, but I think if you add up what the background is and how much it takes to just be above the background, it might end up pretty quickly becoming much more than you'd be putting in. And so it's going to be really hard to detect with these balloons. I sort of wanted to know is if you want to get some sense of dynamics, if there's some other thing to put into the stratosphere that would give you sort of the similar information. Does it have to be SO2, which is not something, it's not going to be easy because you have to detect it somehow in forming aerosols. And it's not an easy thing to put a lot of instruments on balloons to measure SO2, I don't think. So I don't know.
Okay.
Those were just some reactions.
Okay, thanks. If I could have just a few seconds to respond to Mike.
Yeah.
And thanks for all the comments. And you and I have discussed before, and I know a lot of your skepticism. But I mean, I have to stress that it is precisely because I feel that the hard over, abject ban of any tests is, I regard, irrational and disingenuous. So as I said, as I tried to make clear, the first and foremost goal is to defy this ban, which is an irrational ban. I mean, if it's so undetectable that it's not going to do anything, you can't learn anything from it because it's so, then let us do it. And we're idiots. That's okay, but they won't want. They do, even if they say no, you won't learn anything because it's nothing. Well, good. Then let us have fun. We're just playing up there. Good. Thanks for permission, and we'll let you know if we learn anything. But the point is, there is a psychological effect to this ban that I don't think you can deny. That scientists are afraid to even discuss any kind of experiment. Now there is even Roebuck is happy to investigate nature's experiments, but that's because he can't veto them. If he could veto the volcanoes, he would do it. Believe me. And so he can't do it. So what the heck? But the point is, this hard over ban is a psychological thing that must be overcome. I understand that you have trouble buying that, but it's my strong sense that this is taking place. And it's 50. How is it even possible that a test? Now you mentioned NOAA doing flying jets and measuring, but they're not dumping SO2, right, are they? Right. So they're not violating this insane ban. The insane ban is not about science. It's about anything that might actually cool the damned atmosphere. I'm serious. And that's what they want to avoid. And I think Robert is right that it has a heck of a lot to do with, their bet. The bet that they're making is that we gotta double down on emissions reduction, and anything that they believe gets in the way of that, they're going to block regardless. It doesn't matter if it's good science, bad science, no science. They're going to block it, and that's what I regard as, from my perspective, as immoral and reckless. But I mean, I'm starting to rant here, which is bad. But I do understand your skepticism of the scientific issues, but again, I would say you learn by doing. Since this, at the low end, at the inexpensive end, you learn, and I do think there is something for having a higher capacity for failure scientifically, or failure of equipment, because you'll learn from actually being up there in it, and that's the answer I'd give. But there are serious technical questions about sensitivities and things. But I also want to drive the sensor technology development. That will be another thing that will be driven by this. We have to develop lighter and more powerful sensors. So that would be pushing that. I'll stop there so others can talk.
Thank you, Greg. And now we have John Dixon.
Thanks, thanks, Dennis. Thanks, Greg. That was a great presentation. I agree with everybody else there. Very clear. I liked, and I want to refer to your commitment to transparency, because I think that commitment to transparency might open up a whole lot of ideas or activities for us in HPAC, far beyond possibly what you were suggesting for this particular experiment. I would, as I step towards that, Greg, I'd like to ask the question, why would you not seek some form of scientific sponsorship? Because were you to get a group of scientists, and I don't think that's impossible, but were you to get a group of scientists from different organizations or different parts of the world, it actually gives the prospect of, or let's adds more authority to the result. Now, the result might be the same, but you know what publishing is like these days. One paper doesn't really do anything at all. So it's partly a matter of building that authority. I think Ron referred to this earlier, and that would be the reason to look for scientific sponsorship, ideally from different countries, different organizations. Number two, I think that there's no reason, or second point, I think what you should fear is not the scientific pushback. I think you should fear the public pushback. That's what really counts for geoengineering and the public fear that you described so well. So I think it's the public side to worry about, not the science. You know, these are things that bring school kids out on the streets. So if it's not well communicated. So here's the thought. Why couldn't one actually begin that process of testing the concept? And it even could be a consideration of whether HPAC would do it. Put up a note just to secure public feedback, beyond science per se, but public feedback on what would be the idea about, and your concept, Greg. And I think that would be an interesting experiment, but it also puts our toe in the water and gets a sense of the types of feedback that might come. I also liked your idea, have an advisory group of various types. Um, so it's advisory, but it's not the governance mechanism. So, like, that's number one. That could be initiated years in advance. That open, let's say, communication could be done years in advance of the actual test. Number two, I think it's a perfect social science experiment for Ron, which Ron could organise. One could survey the public in relation to a more sort of detailed thinking and strength of support or reactions to different models of what you're proposing, Greg. So that's some sort of a social science experiment that a master's student could do, or student at uni. So that's just a thought, two thoughts for you. Thanks.
Thank you very much for the comments, John. If I could have just a second to answer a little bit. The way I see it is, my vision, it's very transparent because I'm tired of all the lying, and I want to see transparency. On the other hand, it is absolutely true that once you're transparent, and that's why people lie so much, is that you get nailed. So in doing this, I want to first of all, I want to push this thing forward. I want tests to start for SAI. I mean, I would like to do one within the coming year, and I don't think that's impossible, but particularly with things like Stardust going on now. But you're always on this edge between, if you're transparent, you get whacked, but if you're not transparent, you're a liar, and you have to choose. So my vision is you're totally transparent when you decide to do it, and you give a lead time, but I don't want to give them a year's lead time for Alan Robach to figure out a way to whack you, or whatever. On the question of fear, the public, I mean, I'm afraid I am a member of the public, but I have a dimmer view of the public. I don't think the public's paying attention even to climate change, let alone geoengineering. The real foes of geoengineering are in the elite, and they're setting they're the ones who make it difficult in the end for scientists to relate to actually come out and support. I seriously doubt that a 1-ton dump of SO2 would be a blip in the on the social network channels, and it's not going to bring kids to the street. I mean, evidenced by, look at us here. I have never seen one kid, involved in the discussion of planetary restoration. I'm sure there's one out there somewhere, but it's an old guy's thing. And why it's not, I think it's not exciting enough. I don't know, but it's pitiful. But we had one guest, a young woman, right, at a California university, and who was, and that was like a revelation that there was a kid. But the point is, it's hard to get kids out in the street for this particular thing, and I have my own theories with why that is. But I think for me, the target is the disingenuous elite in the climate community, as far as I'm concerned, and not the public, which really has got too much on their minds. And just look around us, and there's just no embrace of the issues of climate change, and let alone geoengineering. Although, I mean, every time you publish an article on geoengineering, there's the usual suspects of 1,000 hate who say, you're crazy, but those are the same guys every time, I think. I mean, the kids are not on this. But anyway, that's the way. But nonetheless, I will consider, the suggestions you made, because they're worth thinking about. So thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Now, we have about 10 minutes before we would wind up at an hour and a half, and I'd like to direct our attention to the way forward from here. And we've had a few references to follow-ups, but I'd like to kind of summarize them and look at what we can do to perhaps support Greg's efforts as we head forward. First of all, I want to pick up on John's suggestion about activities that HPAC might support, including perhaps a working group that could be chaired by or facilitated by Greg, to have others in HPAC join with him in thinking through the next steps in the development of the proposal and its execution. And so I wanted to put that in front of Greg as a possibility that we could support in this area. Now, in terms of current directions for tests of this nature, we should spend a moment reflecting on what programs like ARIA are actually already doing. And ARIA, with Mark Symes as coordinator, is supporting a number of projects that are preparing for testing of SAI. Now, the projects are being funded only to prepare for testing, but that's a step in the same direction. And I had a chat with Mark Symes recently, and he's very interested to join us in an HPAC session. So now I'm thinking, aha, why don't we send Greg's proposal, his slides, etc., to Mark as a basis or foundation for him to speak to us. So in other words, not only the general aspects of the ARIA program, but actually address this issue of taking these testing forward, and where ARIA is going and where it could go, and what other organizations that Mark is in touch with, I'm sure he is, that could support development in this area. Mark is certainly in contact with foundations, other countries, funding programs, Canada, etc., and could provide us some advice on that. So I'd like to throw that out there, Greg, and get actually the leader of a funding program that is supporting preparations for testing to join us.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm happy to send a version of the slides to them, or the slides themselves to him. I mean, there's some more information in these other links. I don't know if you've probably had a chance to look at them, and I might want to, if it was going to Aria, I might want to clean it up a bit. But you know, if you really want to get to him, you could send it to him. I'm not gonna.
Yeah.
I wouldn't stop it, but I think I might produce something a little more refined for them. But you know, I mean, it's something that's fine with me. If you, I don't have any objection to sending them the stuff. But maybe we could exchange a couple mails about exactly what to send, or what version, or whatever, something like that.
Well,
and then
yeah, what
go ahead.
what I'm doing right now is actually setting up a date for Mark to join us. He definitely wants to join us. So we'll set up a date, and then in the meantime, you could clean up your files, et cetera. And once he's already engaged with us, then we unload on him the materials that you have, and then we can have that as part of his.
No, I'd be interested in him reacting to my vitriol.
Yeah. But because Mark is innately fundamentally supportive of this approach to the necessity of doing testing. Now, ARIA has only been able to go as far as funding preparatory work because of the politics, right? That's
exactly.
But we can talk with Mark about the next steps and how we could move it beyond where they are now, which I think would be a follow-up to the practicalities of actually getting this going. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's a couple of things that I'd put on the table. There may be other suggestions. Mike, do you have a suggestion on follow-ups from this discussion?
Well, just a note, I put in the chat a link to the Satan experiment, which actually was an injection into the stratosphere in an experiment that was done with a balloon. So it's been done. I mean, I don't disagree. There's, objections to it. I'm just not sure it's related to the taboo of putting something in the stratosphere. I think it's much more fundamental, but
well, perhaps, I mean,
we'll just have different opinions on that. So
yeah, I mean, the Satan experiment was at the level of a make sunsets balloon. I mean, it put, I mean, I think half a kilogram.
Spice and Satan are two different ones, I think. But anyway,
no, I'm talking about Satan, the one by Andrew.
Mike was referring to, I think, Spice and.
No, Spice was not even in the stratosphere, and it didn't happen.
Water. Yeah, I mean that was.
It was like water too, right? But Satan was an actual balloon launch by Andrew Lockley and all.
Yeah.
But that only put, I think, half a kilogram. I mean, again, that's okay. That's he broke the tier, the tier 3 band. I'm just bumping up the volume, but yeah, I certainly, that is and then I mean, I heard Lockley say that was stupid afterwards, so he's kind of repudiated his own test. But nonetheless, it was a test of sorts, but 3 orders of magnitude down from what I'm trying to do. But yeah. Okay,
yeah,
thanks.
He chose a bad name. Do choose a good name. Yes.
Now,
I'm not trying to piss people off.
Yeah, let's look at next steps here, because we just have a few minutes. Greg, what are your planned next steps that we might be able to support?
Well, tighten up this as a more formal proposal, and see if I can get backers. And if necessary, I'll second mortgage my home and sell my wife and kids into slavery, and I'll do it myself. The world be damned.
Well, let's try to avoid that eventuality. Let's help you to do that. And I can see ways in which we could work this into our whole mission approach, assuming that we have support from our members. But let's do that. Perhaps I could suggest a follow-up for those who are interested in continuing to discuss with you the next steps. We could have a other offline discussion.
Sure.
Would you be interested to do that?
Yeah, sure. If
I
anyone actually wants to.
Absolutely. I think there will be people who want to, and it ties in with Ron's open letter. It ties in with a number of things we're doing.
Yeah.
And I would very much like to. So I'll get back to you. We'll develop a discussion group to take this forward. It deserves more of our thinking and support.
Sure.
Ron, your hand is up.
Yeah, I just so in addition to the open letter, there, Mike, I forgot to mention that HPAC as a whole has decided on a strategy of promoting this directly to the IPCC through hopefully the good services of Dennis and his folks. Dennis, you were not at that meeting, so but I think it really, let me just, I mean, it's got to be multiple tracks. We really do have to do the politics in addition to the actual scientific and technical effort. So I think that's it's unavoidable. With both streams are unavoidable.
Yeah. And I think that in our political discussions, making policymakers aware that there are plans of this nature kind of breaks through some of those barriers as well, because they start, oh, this is real, it's happening. We need to be thinking it through. And then we identify those policymakers that are sufficiently supportive to take this forward. And that's what our First Movers Coalition is all about, is those identity. And then we have our national affiliates like in India and the Philippines and Kenya, which could take this up within their national agenda and their national emergency briefings for policymakers, et cetera. So there's a number of things that we can do to build the eventuality that this is real, that there's no reason why we shouldn't be doing these tests. Other than the blockages that Greg has identified. Great. Well, I think we're just about out of time. Is there anyone who had anything else urgent to share with us before we break for today?
I'll just quickly mention, I think that there's a connection with Glenn Weinreb's climate moonshot concept.
Very much so. Yes. Glenn has just left his chair there, but I'll convey that to him, Robert. He and I have continued to work together on his moonshot business plan, which would include this kind of activity, definitely. Okay, well, thank you all for joining us. Thank you especially, Greg. We need radicals like you to keep us really moving forward. That there's a very important role for radicals like Greg in our group, and I really am grateful that you continue to be angry that things are not moving.
I just a slight correction. I'm a wannabe radical. I haven't done anything radical yet, except maybe talk not talk nice enough. But I want to be a radical.
Children into slavery, I would say that would be a step in that direction. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all for joining.
Well, thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for everybody to comment. I appreciate it all. And if anybody reads those other presentation and has comments or suggestions or complaints or whatever, that would be cool too if you've got time.
Very good, Greg. We'll join you. There must be some of us interested in joining you in making this move forward, so you're not a lone ranger, as you may have felt for some time. I think there will be other members supporting your activities, and we can start to coagulate some real action around that. So I'll be back to you about doing that very soon.
All right.
Okay, well,
thank-
thank you all. Yeah, thanks again, Greg. It was superb
Oh,
presentation.
Thank you.